That has to have been pretty traumatic.
Hmm.
It is.
Hmm.
It is pretty otherworldly. It's
Hmm.
um, the part of Valencia where we are, which is the old town in 1957. Um, we They had another massive flood, which ultimately made him to sort of like reroute the main river that surrounds the old town, and now it's this beautiful park that is just wraps around the city. Because of it, in 1957, this flood did not touch us, but all the surrounding towns were completely are gone. Like so many people have lost everything, and so
Hmm.
it's been a really interesting sort of like shift in realities. The people that were here vacationing and see this as this sort of like holiday paradise, and then you move 10 minutes in any direction and it's just a destruction. I think that we're down to about 2,000 people dead,
Oh, wow.
and
Huh.
they're still finding folks everywhere. It is, and it's weird. We could certainly choose to not see it, but then when you just move about the blocks and you see that extended family from everybody that we come in contact with, and so ourselves, for instance, had to go and find brooms and buckets and the sanitizing supplies, and it's just, I mean, it's surreal. There's so much chaos. Like there's a stadium's filled of supplies that have been donated that cannot be distributed because there's just not enough people to try to organize that. And in the meantime, and it's crazy. The French fire people have showed up before the Spanish emergency response did.
Oh,
It's just
wow.
insane. So yeah,
Wow.
Don't even have words, Mauricio. Don't even have words to. Yeah, sounds like you were in a drought, and then all of a sudden the rains hit, and it just overwhelmed everything. Huh?
in a single night, a year's worth of rain just came
Hmm.
about the northern side of Valencia. And because of, you're right, Mark, Commissioner Lackward, it's because the ground was so dry for so long, it's just washed right through. And so
Hmm.
it was at a moment's notice that entire towns were wiped out.
Hmm.
A lot of man-made choices were made. It is this feels like there's so many big decisions being made, and there are big decisions being made today in the United States. And it seems like we are at several tipping points all around the world, and you know, and we are here doing what we can to imagine how we can mitigate and change and do something about some of the chaos that we ourselves have brought into this world. So,
Yeah.
but I feel that
Mauricio,
it's a
what
great
brought you
company
guys
for them. I'm so sorry. What?
Mauricio, what brought you and your family to Valencia? Do you have friends there? Or?
Ooh, no, we fell in love with it. It's very scientific, using the scientific method. At some point, some 5 years ago, we decided to imagine if there was a town that we would like to spend most time, away from home, sort of like a second home, what would it have to be? And so we went down to like proximity to water, sort of like a balance between old history and progressive thinking, and we just went down a list of all the things that we would want to have, and it just so happens that this was sort of like a Goldilocks type situation. And so this is our third year spending a substantial amount of time here, and it's just a magical place.
Cool, interesting.
Hmm.
Um,
I highly recommend. This is, by the way, this is it's interesting because this is considered the green city of Europe. So there is a lot of like thought into how do you make, for instance, zoo experience without all the vices that come by keeping wild animals in captivity? Or like, how do you do bird conservation in a way that feels it's retaining the original habitats intact? And there's a lot of really interesting thinking that is pertinent to the work that we do here that at one point maybe I'll share via an email or something.
Very cool. Well, Mauricio, given that Carl isn't here, and I know Riva spoke with both of us about being prepared to run the show in Carl's stead, how are you feeling about leading the meeting? Are you comfortable with that, or would you prefer otherwise?
And I always, I mean, we can do this as a duet, Sarah, if you feel like it. Because it is a little bit late, and admittedly, I'm working on the last remnants of coffee around, so I wouldn't mind having your support in whichever manner you feel is appropriate.
Great. That sounds good. I can help us get kicked off here for the start of the meeting if that is helpful. And great. And welcome everyone to the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund Advisory Committee meeting. Since Carl Wenner, our chair, is not here, I am assisting Mauricio as the co-chair in helping us with today's agenda and assisting with Riva as well. And before we go around and do introductions and welcoming of the committee members, I won't try to do the full member updates that Carl usually does. But I think if we just introduce ourselves, that will be good. But before we get started, it feels right to just take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the passing of Bob Salinger, who was a tireless advocate for the OCRF and a conservation icon here in Oregon, who passed away last week unexpectedly. I think we all, most of us know him in probably you could count on all your fingers all the different ways in which you've interacted with Bob Salinger over the years and different conservation efforts. He was with, forever, was with what was formerly called Portland Audubon, is now called Bird Conservation Alliance, or Bird Alliance of Oregon. Forgive me, Joe, if I just messed that up. And most recently was with Willamette Riverkeeper, but he's just been in a lot of circles. He was a big part of the genesis of the OCRF. He most recently was involved in the Elliott State Forest, and I just really appreciated working with Bob on so many things, and just his deep history and lots of conservation issues here in Oregon. He cared deeply about the resource and about his family and friends. So I know he will be missed, and just wanted to offer up the opportunity for anyone else who wanted to just say anything about Bob or acknowledge him in any way. And don't feel obligated.
I could say something. Bob was my supervisor for 9 years.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, sorry, I'm not part of this committee. I just decided to join, and
I'm glad you're here, but just introduce yourselves so folks know who
sorry. My name's Joe Liebesite. I'm the assistant director of statewide conservation at Bird Alliance of Oregon, formerly Portland Audubon. Been there 11 years. And we do have a couple OCRF grants that we're working on, both in Eastern Oregon, or Teresa Wicks, our staff person out in Burns, and on the coast for our plover monitoring. And next meeting, we're going to give a little update on the plover project. Yeah, Bob was my boss, supervisor for 9 years, and also a friend. And as you said, he was an amazing person. He, of course, was very opinionated and had conflicts with people, but he also was pretty transparent and worked closely with people on an issue or an agency on one issue, but then on the same agency, it might be a fight on something. So, but I think his main thing is he was dedicated to conservation, like not many other people I know, and was always willing to work with people no matter what the background. And yeah, we're still just contemplating over here, trying to process his death. We had a meeting yesterday just to kind of process things, and still processing it. So I'll stop there, but I know that a lot of you Bob very closely as well. So look forward to hearing other stories.
Thanks for sharing, Joe.
And I considered Bob a good friend. And one thing you didn't mention, Sarah, among the litany of all the things he's done, the wildlife coexistence probably wouldn't have been moving forward
bet.
without Bob and his efforts there, and the things that he did over in Burns to keep that collaborative going with his work with OWEB and trying to keep that funded and keep that going. The list goes on and on. So Joe, have you heard about, as it might be a little bit early, but heard about a service or a memorial or anything like that?
Yeah, we're kind of following the lead of the family. We,
Yeah.
we don't want to do anything until they give us a green light. And, I know that there are other organizations that he worked for, like, most recently, Willamette Riverkeeper. So yeah, we'll let people know as soon as we have an idea. But yeah, thanks for asking.
Yeah, sure.
I would just share that I got to know Bob over the last 5 or 6 years while we worked on the Elliott State Forest Advisory Committee. And what was just remarkable about Bob was his ability to dig into the depth of the details of the HCP and the 400-page forest management plan. And, he worked effortlessly. He was a night owl. So, he worked between midnight and 6, and you get emails that were sent at 4 a.m. But it was just testimony to his commitment to dig through the detail and understand the specificity of what was going on, and then be able to bring it back and share it with everybody else. And as Joe said, and everybody knows, Bob was really good at working on all sides of the aisle, so to speak. And, he could disagree, but he was never disagreeable, which I think really built him a lot of friendships and partnerships over the years. And, his family was really special to him as well. I don't follow Facebook closely, but he was always posting pictures of his family and different trips. So he will be missed by all, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Mark.
I also want to give Mark kudos for, you were inspirational in getting Bob to be awarded the Wildlife Society. I can't remember the name of the award, but you spurred a bunch of folks to write letters of support, and I'm glad that happened. Because we didn't know he was going to die, but I'm glad that he was able to earn that award while he was still here.
Yeah, he got the Oregon Chapter Wildlife Society Lifetime Achievement Award. And, he showed up in Bend, and there's 300 plus people there. And, Bob came out in the coat and the tie, and he was the only one with a coat and a tie. He goes, "Oh, I got to go change." So he came back in more typical Salinger attire, which was great.
I'm sure he had the same suit and tie that he wore every day in Salem.
Probably the only one he had.
Well, thanks, folks. Anybody else before we carry on? That was nice. Just a moment to recognize a conservation giant. Okay, so I guess I didn't even do a proper introduction of myself. I am Sarah Reif. I am the Habitat Division Administrator here at ODFW, and I think we'll just go around and knock out the introductions of the committee members. And Mauricio, why don't we start with you?
Happy to do it. Mauricio Ladrian, Vice Chair of the Oregon Conservation Recreation Advisory Committee at large, based in Portland, currently speaking to you from Spain. And I'll just pass the ball around. How about Jim Hammett?
I'm Jim Hammett. I split my time between John Day and south of Burns Junction, and I'm retired from the National Park Service. I've been retired for about 12 years.
Thanks, Jim. Mark Stern.
Yeah, hi everybody. Mark Stern, and I serve as an at-large member on the OCRF committee. In that capacity, I also serve on the Private Forest Accord representing OCRF there. It's nice to see everybody today. Jane,
Jane.
Hi, sorry I blinked out there for a minute. Jane Hartline checking in from Sauvie Island.
Thanks, Jane. Commissioner Lamhart.
Hi there, Mark Lephart. I had the privilege of serving on the commission and liaison to OCRF from the commission, non-voting member.
Jenna.
Hey everyone, I'm Jenna Merman. I am the planning and design lead for the Oregon Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm also an ex officio, aka non-voting member of Commissioner Labhart. Good to see everyone.
Thanks, Jenna. Liza Jane.
Good morning. No, good Lord. Good afternoon. Good day. My name is Liza Jane McAllister. I live in Wallowa County, and I represent the Columbia Plateau and Blue Mountain Eco regions on the board.
Thank you. And Riva.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Riva Gilman. I'm the OCRF coordinator based out of Corvallis, Oregon.
And we have Tiffany with us as well. Tiffany, do you want to say hello?
Hello, I'm Tiffany Caldwell. I am Riva's assistant.
Thanks for being here with us. And then we have two guests. Joe already introduced himself. Thanks, Joe. And then Derek Broman is here with us as well. Do you want to say hi, Derek?
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Derek Broman. I'm the ODFW Game Program Manager, and I've had a lot of interactions with you over the years, and big fan of the group. Please keep it up.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Committee member wise. Good, yeah. All right. Very good then. Riva, you tell me, are we skipping over the approval of the minutes? How are we on quorum? You know, we have a number of members who are, you could put dots all over the globe right now in terms of where some of your fellow committee members are at the moment. So I wasn't sure if we had enough folks for a vote on the minutes.
We actually do. We have just right at quorum, so we can move towards approving the minutes. Just made it. Let me just share my screen just a second. Oh, sorry. There we go.
And so the committee would have received these minutes via email, and they're likely posted on our webpage. Did anyone have any corrections or comments on the minutes? And or would anyone be willing to make a motion?
If there are no corrections, I'm happy to make the motion. I move to approve the October 1st, 2024 meeting minutes with the continued authority to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation.
And I will second that.
Great. And all those in favor? Thumbs up. Super. Thank you. Great. And so then, Riva, just checking in terms of our guest speakers today, if we just race through this agenda, how prepared might they be to join us early?
So I spoke with Monty and Vanessa just a little bit before the meeting. We had they joined to make sure everything was working with screen sharing and all that. And they plan to be online right around 1:30 in about 10 minutes. Okay. So if we move a little fast, it should be okay.
Sounds great. And so as I'm reading through the agenda, I believe the next is you, Riva, covering some OCRF grant program business updates for us.
Yeah, that's correct. So I have just a few things to share because we just closed our fall RFP last week on October 29th. So that was round 8 for you all. So the program received a total of 52 project proposals. And so this is a little bit less than we received in the spring. However, not surprising since the program did just award 24 projects this summer. There's still a significant amount of interest for funding from this round. So 52 projects, and that was a total of 2.8 million in total requested funds for round 8, and 2.3 million of that was for drought projects. And the average request in this round was 54,000. And then, so now I'm just going to go into a few, I have some summary plots to share from round 8 submissions. So I'll share those. These graphs, they're going to be showing the 52 applications that you received. And the first one is for the drought aspect. So does the project address an aspect of drought for the state of Oregon? And a little bit over 70% of the projects did fall into this category. And they were able to explain that they do fall into the category and why. This is good news for the OCRF program, since that means the majority of the projects are able to be funded with the drought package funds. And the next bit of information I have is for the conservation versus recreation classification of these projects. So the project applicants are they self-identify their project on the spectrum between conservation, a pure conservation project, and a pure recreation project. And so this pure conservation slice of the pie is this darker blue. You can see that there. And that was about 1/4 of the projects fell into this category of pure conservation. And then this orange slice here is conservation with a recreation element. And that was 35% of the projects. This gray section is an even mix. That's 15%. So these are projects that are right at the intersection between conservation and recreation, kind of right in the middle. Recreation with a conservation element is this yellow section, 21%. And then, not surprisingly, only 6% of the applicant pool self-classified their project as pure recreation. So that's that light blue area there.
Reva, can you remind us how much we have to spend in this round? I know I should know that, but I don't.
Yeah, so we have, because we spent 1.2 million in our last round, we have 800,000 of drought funds to award, and we have 200,000 of non-drought projects to award. So we're looking to fund about $1 million. But we really can't go over that 800,000 in drought because that will pretty much use it all up right at the 800,000 mark. All right, any questions about this conservation versus recreation classification?
Just to follow up to your last comment there. So in the spring, when we do another RFP, is all the drought money gone at this point now?
We will be using up most of it. Yeah, depending on, I need to look at the exact numbers, but I believe we're going to be using up most of the drought funds in this round.
Because I thought our idea was we were going to have $1 million in the fall RFP, and we still had $1 million to grant out in the spring RFP. So I'm just trying to understand the dynamic there.
Well, maybe I need to check on that because I thought we were using the last of our drought funds in this round.
Yeah, well, maybe you can circle back on that, but I thought we were going to have another RFP in the spring for $1 million from the various funding sources. I'm not sure quite how they broke out, but it'd be good to double check on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that. Liza Jane?
Yeah, thank you. Do you know how this compares to the last time? The percentages, are there any great shifts or is this about the same?
This was similar. The breakage for, yeah, it was pretty similar, the percentages from when I
Okay.
was comparing to the last round.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Just, this could be not totally accurate, but I'm looking at some quick numbers. Reba, that of the drought funds that we were given, minus what has already been allocated to awarded projects, it does appear as though there's about 2 million. So that would include round 8. So I think we'll have another go in the spring if I'm looking at the right numbers.
Oh, okay. Okay. So
but
I must
we
have had
will
a-
verify this for the committee and follow up with a note.
thank you, Sarah. I must have forgotten about that.
And we can provide maybe a more thorough budget update at the next committee meeting as well, if folks would like just that big picture look again at where things stand.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right. Ready to continue? So for the geography ecoregion, so where the projects are, is always interesting to look at. And so I'm seeing, so the column on the left is the ecoregion. Blue Mountains, Coast Range, up from there. And then across is the number of projects. So that's how you can read these numbers here on the ends. And so we're seeing a pretty good distribution. So we have geographical representation of all ecoregions in the applications. And Willamette Valley has the most, as is typical. So we have the most representation there. And then you can see that the near shore, oh, sorry about that. Near shore and Columbia Plateau have the least. So you didn't receive many applications, as many from these regions, but they are still represented. Any questions on the ecoregions? I will also note that we do have decent representation for Northern Basin and Range. This region is usually less represented, but we're seeing some decent representation there. All right, and now we'll go into project type. So we have most of the projects the applications we received in this round were going to be, an element of the project is going to be addressing community engagement and education and awareness at 44 and 40. And then for monitoring, 26 of the projects are addressing that. Research, 22, restoration, 23 projects of restoration, and 22 for outdoor access. And one other. All right, any questions about that, or ready to move into a timeline for this fall RFP and where we're at? Okay, not hearing anything. So for the fall RFP timeline, so that just closed last week, and we're going to be moving into the technical review period coming up soon. And as promised, I am going to be assigning the advisory committee reviews earlier as well. So expect those just right about mid-November. I'll try to get those out right after the technical reviews are assigned. So that way you can have more of a lead time into checking out these projects and getting a head start on the reviews for this round. And scheduled to have the advisory committee recommendations in February and commission voting in March. All right, so that's all I have. So I'm going to pause here and pass it back to Sarah to see if there are any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Comments?
I think it looks good, and I really appreciate the technical review that the department and the various people do. That's really helpful. So I know it's a sort of another thing they're asked to do, but I really appreciate that effort and insight there.
Thanks, Mark. Great. Well, with that, it sounds like we are ready to move on to the communication update. And this is an update on our ongoing contract that we have to build a strategic communications plan for the OCRF program. Riva, did you want to walk through an update on that for us?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll know we have developed a scope of work, a communications planning RFP with the chairs and ODFW staff, and Oregon Wildlife Foundation has helped make this happen. And the review team selected Quinn Thomas as the final candidate. And so far we have had 2 meetings with Quinn Thomas in October. So the first one happened, it was a kickoff meeting on October 14th. And then the next meeting was as a kind of a beginning brainstorming discussion that happened on October 23rd with Quinn Thomas. And now they're kind of moving into their research phase. They're going to be doing a few stakeholder interviews with grant recipients. So that's kind of where they're at. Just a brief update for the group on how that's progressing. And Sarah and Mauricio, I don't know if you have anything to add about how the process has been going, and what if anything you wanted to share with the group.
I'd say that my impression so far has been very positive. They're very deliberate. They've been very detail oriented. They've been very transparent in the communications. The lead from Quinn Thomas has been keeping us, providing the group with, a detailed explanation of which steps they're going to be taking and why, and trying to invite our opinion. And just, I say so far, I feel very confident that they're going to deliver for us what we were hoping that they would at the end of it.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think they're asking the right questions about, who we think our audiences are and what our purpose is in wanting to strategically communicate. And they have a deep background in this kind of work. So I felt really reassured in the work session I attended with Quinn Thomas. And they also have all of the past work that we did for the strategic plan, in terms of those interviews that were held for that process. So they aren't reinventing the wheel. I think Reva, you've passed along to them all of the current existing media and resources, outreach resources that we've developed over time. So that's their starting place. We have a lot of great existing material within OCRF, and so that's really what they're starting from, which I think is good for them to help us sort of take it to the next level. So it's been good conversation with them. Like I said, I think they're asking the right questions. Any questions on that? Quiet group today. Cool. Well, do we have our guests here, Reva? I think we do.
Yes.
Do I see?
Yeah.
I see Vanessa and I see Monty. Hi, folks. Thanks for joining us. So this is a presentation from one of our OCRF sponsored projects. We have Vanessa Petro and Monty Gregg here with us. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I think we get so caught up in just the business of handing out funds for these projects that we don't get as much time as we all would probably like to circle back and actually hear about project outcomes and how things are going. So it's always such a pleasure when we get a chance to hear from the folks on the ground that are actually delivering conservation through these projects. So thank you for being here today, and we'll pass it over to you. And if you wouldn't mind just giving the group a little bit of an introduction into who you are before you get into your presentation, that would be awesome.
Sure thing. I'll go Vanessa and then I'll hand it over to you. I'm Monty Gregg. I'm the forest wildlife biologist on the Ochoco National Forest and Crooked River National Grassland. I've been in this position for about 7 years now. Spent most of my career in Central Oregon working on the Deschutes National Forest, and I'm kind of closing in on the end now. So I got about 5 years to go, and I'm going to set sail for retired life. Vanessa, your turn.
So, morning all. My name is Vanessa Petro. I am the lead wildlife biologist with the State Forest Division for Oregon Department of Forestry. I've been in this role now for a little over 2 years. And prior to this role, where I first met Monty, is when I was a senior faculty wildlife researcher at Oregon State University, where I specialized in American beaver and black bear research. So that explains why I'm present here today, providing the talk alongside of Monty for y'all. So I guess maybe without further ado, we'll go ahead and jump into the presentation and tell you about the great stuff that we've been up to with your guys' support. Cool. All right, Monty, I'm going to go ahead and load you up.
Sweet. Well, in all honesty, Vanessa is really the kingpin behind this whole thing. She's the brains of the operation. I'm just kind of the grant writer, more or less, but definitely working together. So let's dive into this, just because we don't have a ton of time, and we want to have ample room for questions. So welcome to the Ochoco National Forest. If you've never been there before, I always tell people it is a connected series of wet meadows that is highly influenced by beaver activity. And historically had a lot of beavers collectively across the entire forest. It's one giant sponge, if you will. This photo is kind of a great example of kind of what the forest looks like. Large meadow stringers with an influence of varying degrees of conifers surrounding these meadows. This project is really a result of a 30+ year trapping moratorium on beavers that we the Ochoco National Forest in the mid to late 80s asked ODFW for assistance in minimizing trapping impacts to beavers based on the restoration that we had ongoing at the time. By decade, ODFW has really asked the need for this trapping moratorium to continue. And although we have anecdotal information, we really never had the ability to provide any hardcore numbers on the results of the trapping ban. Here recently, it's become very, very controversial as far as trapping and removing beavers from public lands. And so Derek Broman asked us if we had some empirical data we could give, and lo and behold, we could not. And so the project allowed us to take Vanessa's protocol that she recently developed and really kind of help us design a process to monitor beaver distribution across the entire national forest. Honestly, it's really timing in that historically we probably couldn't have pulled this off anyways, just because we didn't have a way to systematically look at beavers on a landscape that large. So Vanessa's protocol was, like I say, very, very timely. This grant really was a capacity grant. You want to switch slides for me, Vanessa? That we requested OCRF funding to hire an intern over a 2-year period to assist us with not only the occupancy monitoring that we developed across the entire Ochocos, but also the implementation of restoration projects that would influence beaver distribution in occupied streams. So we were able to work with Discover Your Forest. If you're not familiar with them, they're in an embedded NGO that the Forest Service has that allows us to use that NGO capacity to do a variety of work, but in this instance, hire an intern that can use this experience to secure employment in the future based on the experience they get. The dude that's leaning on the stream stick there is Ian Alford. He is who we hired to assist us and kind of lead the occupancy monitoring. Great guy. He's a student at Oregon State University Cascades campus there in Bend. Next slide, Vanessa. And so this is Gray Creek and Gray Prairie, one of the large restoration projects that we have going on the forest. And Ian was very, very instrumental in helping us install beaver dam analogs. We have beavers in the stream, like I mentioned before, working in areas that we have current occupancy and trying to help move distribution in through that system. So it was got a lot of experience with helping us install and lead some of the BDA crews across the forest. So one of the biggest pieces of this project, and the reason that it was so important to get it going, is the Ochoco has a very, very large investment in restoration of ridgetop to valley bottom, if you will, type watershed projects. Everything from BDA installation to stage 0 restoration, restoring floodplains and water tables. With that kind of investment, because it's multi-million-dollar, we need to be monitoring beavers consistently across this landscape. And so obviously there was a need to legitimize keeping this trapping ban in place and looking at what our projects were doing collectively from a distribution perspective. With that, I'm going to switch gears and hand it over to Vanessa. She's going to describe how we monitored or modeled potential beaver habitat, and then how we put the monitoring together.
Hi, thank you, Monty, for providing the introduction. And so taking the lead from here, I'm just going to quickly cover how we implemented the site selection process. So keep in mind, when Monty and his staff approached me about developing a species level monitoring program for their forest, we recognized it made the most sense to monitor both damming and non-dam beaver habitat. And this is something I always recommend for species level monitoring, especially when you're interested in distribution and occurrence at the population level. Because when it comes to American beavers, what we've learned through research work and monitoring I've been associated with throughout the state of Oregon, typically your beavers that are not contributing to dam construction, so either they're in habitat where dam establishment is probable because of the conditions, but they're not implementing dam construction because their needs are met, or they're simply occupying habitat where dam construction cannot occur because of those physical constraints of the stream system. Those populations typically represent, from what we've been seeing, at least 60% of the overall population area that you're sampling. So if you're not also including that non-damming habitat piece, you're kind of missing a large piece of the puzzle when you're trying to better understand beaver population status in a given area. So with that, because we're now just targeting both types of beaver habitat, for us, we ended up having to generate what we refer to as our local prediction of available beaver habitat, or as we commonly refer to it, potential beaver habitat. So we did this as an ArcGIS exercise that involves expert opinion, what habitat characteristics are identified in the published literature for our area of interest, and also, of course, known beaver locations on the forest itself. So keep in mind, this modeling exercise provided a map of available beaver habitats. So it's essentially, we're trying to find on the Ochoco landscape, where are we most likely to intercept beaver activity, whether it's damming or non-damming on this forest. We did not generate an HSI model that provides an index of habitat quality across the forest. That's a project that we can actually develop later on based off of all the data collection we've already conducted and plan to continue to collect as well. So the predictors we use for mapping our potential beaver habitat include a suite of variables, including the StreamNetMap product from TerrainWorks. So here we're using geomorphic habitat characteristics for identifying sites. We're also overlaying that information with the National Hydrographic Data Set. So here we're bringing in that perenniality component to the StreamNetMap product. And of course, with beavers, we're also adding that vegetative component as well for the mapping exercise. So here we use the lemma-based product of their greatest nearest neighbor vegetation structure map, where we were choosing locations that represented either sparse or open canopies, in addition to early sterile habitat conditions reflective of sapling and small pole size vegetation in the riparian areas. After our pilot survey season in 2022, because this is kind of like an adaptive process with the mapping or the site selection process, we realized that there were some areas that were being identified in the map that actually weren't, shouldn't have been sites to be considered at all. And so we recognized that by incorporating the riparian habitat conservation area GIS layer available through the Forest Service, we were able to then remove areas that had undefined channels. So that way we could better focus our time in areas, again, where we're going to have a higher likelihood of intercepting beaver activity. So the question always is, when you want to start a monitoring program, where in the world do you start looking for beavers? In this case, with the Ochoco, when you have a 750,000 acre forest. So using that StreamNetMap layer, we identified that we have a total of over 5,000 miles of available stream habitat throughout the entire national forest where we're focusing this beaver monitoring activity. When we conduct our ArcGIS exercise of those predictors of potential beaver habitat, we only end up with a total of 97 miles across the forest that represents potential beaver habitat. So this might seem small to you, it's because in reality, this only represents 2% of all available habitat. However, I can argue that any of the projects I've already been a part of through research and monitoring, you're typically going to see less than 5% of all available stream habitat in a given spatial extent actually represent beaver habitat, especially both the damming and non-damming component. So here we have 97 total miles to work with, right? The reality is no one can actually census this amount of habitat identified in a spatial extent, especially in national forests. It's a lot. Typically, most projects I'm familiar with or a part of can maybe do 20 miles tops per survey season. So using these 97 miles, the recommendation I usually give folks is to at least target 15% of all of the delineated potential beaver habitat. So in the case of the Ochocos, if we're using a 200-meter sampling transect, this comes out to 115 sites. So that 15% minimum when randomly selected across the Ochoco National Forest, represents a total of 14 miles that we intend to survey to identify where there's currently or where there is beaver activity throughout the national forest. So hopefully on this third map, you can see all of the yellow dots, which represent the randomly selected sites that we have identified and pulled forward or pulled into future monitoring and data collection efforts. So just to jump into the results, so like Monty mentioned, so the actual beaver activity surveys are following guidance I provide in the beaver activity survey protocol that I was a lead author of when I was still at OSU. So these surveys are typically conducted during the principal dam building period, which is essentially August through October. And so knowing that time frame will kind of help understand the results. So I went ahead and I included the 2022 pilot survey results just to kind of give you guys a little bit of comparison with two data sets now collected on Ochoco National Forest, recognizing that the funds from OCRF definitely contributed to the 2023 data collection. So the number in the parentheses behind the year represents the number of sites that were sampled in that given survey season. For site status, we report out on the number of sites surveyed, but also the proportions. For site status, what this represents, so in case of the none category, that's surveyors went to a randomly selected site that was modeled for potential beaver habitat, did not find any evidence of beaver activity. If they did find past represents beaver activity that's at least 12 months or 1 year old or greater. Recent activity represents beavers that have been in a system, usually late spring throughout the summer. And so this is kind of highlighting areas where beaver are using a stream reach, but it's only for dispersal-based purposes as they're moving around a watershed or a system, trying to figure out where they want to actually establish. And then finally, the last site status we have is current. So this means when you show up to the survey site, there are beavers actively occupying that reach that you are surveying. So focusing on the 2023 results, you can see the proportions there where there's at least 40% of the sites we model identified that didn't have any beaver activity. There's a large proportion of past activity, and then it continues to trickle down from there. These numbers aren't alarming, especially to me, because I've seen that this is a similar trend that I've seen elsewhere, which I'll show you here in a minute. But typically, when it comes to beavers as a species, and because they're density dependent, they also eat themselves out of house and home. So you're always going to have a larger proportion of sites where there's past or inactive beaver occupancy, because those sites are in recovery status versus a smaller proportion of sites where there's more continuous or persistent beaver occupancy. So what's cool about these results is we can actually roll these up in terms of site status, and we can essentially bin them based off of the activity of whether it's an active site or inactive. So this is kind of now honing in on the actual locations where we did detect beaver activity. So the numbers now in the parentheses behind each year correspond to the number of sites where we actually found beaver activity. So here we're finding again, with the active component, there's going to be a smaller proportion of active beaver sites on the landscape than what you would in that inactive status. Excuse me. So how does this compare to other locations across the state where we've been implementing beaver-based monitoring, or I should say beaver activity-based monitoring? So I pulled a couple examples from projects that I've worked with, recognizing that as we speak right now, because of the Beaver Action Plan, there is ongoing surveying as we speak right now across at least up to 8 of the beaver emphasis areas across the state. So really jazzed about the data we're already seeing there, but don't have the opportunity right now to present any of that information, but that will definitely be something cool to compare and contrast against in the future. So working with what we have available to us, what this table does is report out on proportions relative to the activity findings. So to kind of give you a little bit of background, so the first location, that Southern Coast Range, so that's down in the Umpqua area. So this study site represents a location where the basin is half owned by private industrial ownership and the other half is in federal ownership. The Santiam BEA, which is the next site to the right, is reflective of the North Santiam beaver emphasis area that we're currently monitoring in the West Cascades here in Oregon. And then of course we have the Ochoco example from 2023 that represents essentially our central or Eastern Oregon component. So here you have representation of Coast Range, Cascades, Eastern Oregon. And so with that, you're seeing that in terms of number of sites sampled, they're pretty similar, right? At least over 100 sites total. Of those sites, recognizing that each location used slightly different beaver habitat model predictions, we're finding that at least in most cases, there's at least 50% of those sites were actually detecting beaver activity of different ages. The Santiam BEA is lower than normal, and I suspect a lot of good explanation for that lower number compared to elsewhere is largely due to the 2020 Labor Day fires, where a lot of evidence of foraging in adjacent riparian areas has actually been burned and is now undetectable. But overall, when you look at the proportions of inactive detections versus active, they're actually pretty similar across the state as a whole. Granted, the Southern Oregon Coast Range has a larger proportion of active detections within the study area. And also, it's kind of a similar trend as well with the dam activity in terms of these are the proportions of surveyed sites where we positively identified beaver activity and where damming was also found as well. And so one thing that's interesting to note is that in the Southern Oregon Coast Range and the Santiam BEA sites, those locations don't have a trapping ban versus, as Monty was describing earlier, in the case of the Ochoco National Forest, this is a location that's had a trapping ban in place for a couple of decades now, or several decades now. So this is just kind of a quick taste of what it is we're seeing out there, especially the photos that you see on the right hand of the screen. These typically, when we're taking photos of beaver activity while we're surveying, some of us will also snap a photo that represents the reach as well. And so in the case of the photo on the left, you're seeing a site where there's no water available, but there's definitely what I would argue there's beaver forage available. And then in the case of the photo on the right, it's the opposite, where in this case, we have a trickle of water, but there's not much vegetation available for forage resources for beavers to occupy that site. So I'll leave it there in terms of like a high level summary of the sampling results so far from the beaver activity monitoring on the Ochoco National Forest. So if anything, Monty and I are very appreciative of the funding opportunity that you provided us to be able to implement this monitoring activity, provide empirical data to help guide a lot of our management decisions moving forward. So hopefully I didn't go over time, but definitely thank everyone for their attention and again, support.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Lampart.
Okay, well, thank you. That was extremely interesting. And of course, Vanessa, I probably didn't capture what I probably should have captured, but because you said your high level review here. So there hasn't been trapping in the Ochoco National Forest for decades, 30 years or something like that. So the reduction in the number of beavers, if I hear you correctly, so the Labor Day fires were significant. They ate themselves out of house and home and habitat. Is that, first of all, is that accurate? And so over that period of time, why are there other reasons or other thoughts, and maybe Derek can weigh in too, but other reasons or other thoughts about the reduction from, inactive 89, 57, and then active 11. So compared to other parts of the state and maybe Greg, you could weigh in too. So help me understand the kind of the rationale and the reasons and the thought process that went into your analysis that you summarized so well that I'm trying to put it all together here. Help me understand that. And why the reduction significantly? If I'm
Right.
correct in that. So
No problem, Commissioner Labhart. So you're essentially, if I'm understanding your correction or your question correctly, it's you're thinking about the slide with the statewide results so far and trying to compare a Coast Range example with the Cascades versus what we have in the Ochoco's on the east side. So the whys are essentially at this point are assumptions, and we would ideally like to actually test hypotheses relative to what are the potential limiting factors for these different areas associated with where we're actually finding beaver activity, where we're not finding activity, and then also to dig further, where is there damming, where is there not damming activity occurring as well at these sites. So in general, what you hopefully saw was, granted, the pattern in terms of activity outcomes are pretty similar in terms of you will always have more inactive than you will active. And again, that kind of comes back to understanding beavers as a species and realizing they're a density dependent species. So they're ultimately limited by habitat availability, right? So there's that component. So it's a kind of a question of getting back to, well, how much habitat is actually available and what is the quality of that available habitat? Because you're going to have higher site persistence in locations where there's high quality habitat versus available habitat that is of much lower quality, where beavers may be able to move in and occupy it for a year, maybe two, but then they have to leave because just from their presence alone through foraging pressure, which it's in a way kind of increases the speed of habitat succession at a site, right? They have to leave the site and then the site enters into a recovery period. And that recovery period could be like 8 to 10 years. It totally depends on the location, where you're talking about in the state of Oregon, what the existing condition was before it went into that recovery state. So that comes into play. So there's that cyclic occupation, right? In the case of the Santiam BEA, like I mentioned earlier, I suspect a lot of our activity detections were influenced by the Labor Day fire piece. What's great about that study area, that BEA in particular, is that because we have that fire component and now we've been frequently monitoring beaver activity. So we have the 2023 data set. And like I mentioned earlier, we have survey crews out right now. The ODF&W has been leading out on, they're currently collecting data again throughout that entire BEA, just at a different selection of randomly selected sites. And so what's cool is we have that existing data set, and now we can track the trend of beaver occupancy over time. So we can actually see how quickly they actually move back into different areas and reestablish themselves, and compare that against different burn severity patterns and stuff within that Labor Day footprint. So sorry, this is kind of like turning into a long-winded answer. It just depends on where you're at. Because I would say there's probably local factors operating, different factors operating at different locations across the state.
So is there any correlation between trapping in those other areas and non-trapping for 30 years on the Ochoco with numbers?
So we can't infer, what's the best way to describe it? So what you saw is the only data we really have to work with, and we're waiting now on the 2024 survey results, not only through ODF&W's BEA work, but also various tribes, NGOs, and other folks are also using that survey protocol to collect empirical data to help us better understand beaver activity and population status across the state in different areas. So I would caution on making any conclusions just yet until we actually have that larger pool of empirical data from which we can actually test different hypotheses on to better understand what's going on. But what that table that I showed you represents currently is, so far it seems like the pattern is pretty similar across the state. But what's driving each one ultimately, it may change with the 2024 results, but to really hone in on what's going on, you need to do the hypothesis testing.
Okay, so just Greg or Derek, anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, like, because I'm not associated with Vanessa's other projects, just the Ochoco National Forest, and only familiar with it and the trapping ban. As I mentioned early on, the need for empirical data. Right now, we're just getting baseline and 30 years post trapping ban, which is very, very unfortunate. Like if we would have had a systematic approach to collecting this data 30 years ago, Commissioner Labhart, we'd be in a lot better place. We could draw inferences from, trapping versus non-trapping. We can't do that right now. But just within the infancy of this project, we're already seeing on the Ochoco specifically, even with the trapping ban in place, limiting factors for beaver occupation or distribution within, streams that have persistent water. I think one of the issues too, like I say, scratching the surface is, things are getting hotter and drier, and we're seeing some of our streams that have had persistent water consistently over the decades completely dry up. And so you see occupancy past occupancy sign in some of these systems, and it doesn't matter if it's trapped or not anymore. There's just no water in those systems, so there's no reason for a beaver to be there. So just things like that, and then I'll just leave it at that. Derek, you got something?
Just a quick follow-up on what Monty described. So because there's a lot of interest now in movement and implementing beaver activity monitoring in different areas of interest, Monty and I and others with ODF and W staff have now been working with other folks in national forests across Eastern Oregon where there's either no trapping ban or there is a trapping ban in place. So that way we can actually further build on that data set to kind of help answer that particular question of interest.
Yeah,
with empirical data, of course.
Yeah, I think for us, really, from a Blue Mountain Forest perspective, Commissioner Labhart, it's really important to compare apples to apples. So for our forest that has a trapping ban and our neighboring forest in Malheur that does not, we have very similar habitat types, similar forest practices. It makes more sense for us to be looking at our neighbor to see what's going on there. So if that makes sense.
So I apologize, Monty. I called you Greg, so apologize
no worries.
for that.
Happens all the time.
Jim, well, I see your hand is raised, so we'll have you go next. And Reva did just send me a note that our other speaker today, unfortunately, had his internet cut by nearby construction work that was going on. So unfortunately, James Whalen's not going to be able to join us. So we have time. If you're holding a question, feel free to raise your hand because we can cover it. Go ahead,
great.
Jim.
Okay, great. That was, I really enjoyed the presentation. That was good. And having spent a lot of time in some of these spots, I guess one of the questions that I've got looking at predictors and habitat for beaver relates to grazing permits and grazing. Did you have some of the spots, particularly in the Ochoco, which I'm familiar with, that you could evaluate where grazing was not a part of the picture there? I'm just interested in how that fits in as a variable because I didn't hear it discussed at all. And yet I feel, particularly in these wet meadow systems, the allotments that are grazed and those wet meadows that are grazed versus those that are not are dramatically different. And I'd just be interested in how you sort of look at that as a variable. It seems to me it's far more important than trapping, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I think, Vanessa, you want me to take that? Yeah. So it's
that's your piece.
It's hard pressed to find a space in the Blue Mountain Forest where there's not a cow.
Yeah, I know.
So, but with that said, we have an area of high beaver occupancy in Antler Prairie that has that's private land that has active grazing and active grazing management on it that is one of our showcase locations. So it really depends on the timing and duration, intensity of herbivory, and not just domestic herbivory. We see places that are very, very important spots for overwintering elk, and we see similar impacts. Not that I'm in one camp or the other. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that's really hard to put your hands around. As far as limiting factors, though, as we do the monitoring, it's something that we have made note of because of the amount of, or the limitations on available habitat. So where we have very active permits, I mean, I think one of the things that was a take home for me, just based on doing some of the monitoring myself, if you're familiar with Big Summit Prairie, there's a series of tributaries to upper North Fork of the Crooked River that flow from the public lands north of the prairie down into the prairie and then into the North Fork. Because of it being all private land and it is a cattle ranch, there's very, very little beaver habitat there. And so we have past occurrences of beaver there where we don't have any current use. And it's apparent that could be that the prairie could be actually a barrier to movement for beaver just because of lack of habitat. So it's some of these things that we're starting to just get our hands around to kind of understanding distribution occupancy. So it's probably one of those things that is going to be a major limiting factor for habitat connectivity.
The Crazy Creek fire, I assume, is not going to be grazed for about 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Will that give you an opportunity to sort of evaluate some of this beaver habitat in the absence of grazing? Because I'm assuming the fire did not hit those wet meadows. It just hit the surrounding uplands.
That's correct.
I haven't had a chance to get into the Crazy Creek, but that's my inherent feeling about what that fire did.
That's correct. It's interesting how resilient these places are too, because some of the drainages that it burned through, within a month, we were seeing regeneration of aspen a foot tall. So there's a lot of carbs still in the root systems of these plants, and so they're recovering instantaneously. I think, Vanessa and I have been talking about opportunistically deploying monitoring in places where we know there's occupancy, where we could kind of monitor the effects of fire, things like that. Her protocol actually makes that attainable and allows us to add a piece to this data set that we weren't really anticipating. So although we will continue with the distribution of the randomly selected sites, we have the ability to site specifically look at locations that we have interest in and draw inferences from that as well.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Mauricio?
Yep. I have a feeling that somebody else had their hand up before me early on. I don't know if it was you, Mark, but before I do that, I'd love to give that person a chance.
I saw Liza Jane had her hand up too. I don't know.
Please go ahead, Liza.
Thank you, Mauricio. Gonna just share my experience with beavers and grazing in the riparian areas on the ranch, and can tell you that prior to, I had a 10-year contract to no graze it after the restoration work, and we had beavers show up maybe once. And since we started grazing it the last few years, the beavers are multiplying like crazy in there. So I don't know the correlation, but I can tell you that what you said, Monty, about targeted intentional grazing can really, in my experience, assist with creating that habitat for beavers.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Liza. Like that's really kind of that piece of antler prairie. Like it's the timing and intensity is really key there. Like the permittee doesn't use that pasture all summer long. They technically call it flash grazing, where they move the cows through there, do a really good job utilizing the available forage, and so that those cows aren't turning onto hardwoods, and having more impacts on something that the beavers would be using. So it really just depends on the permittee. We have really great permittees like that, and then we have some that we have to, monitor a lot. And so it's a large landscape. That's why we're doing this forest wide.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I'll jump in now. So that was lovely. Thank you so much. And so what makes me very excited about this kind of projects is what I feel is like could be collateral benefit. And so I was curious about it. It seems like this is our methodologies and that you're developing for the first time and for this project in particular. Is that correct, Vanessa?
So to take a step back, so the protocol itself, that came into a public version back in, I think, 2020 in response to a lot of folks reaching out and being like, hey, you guys are surveying beaver activity. How do you do it? Like, what are your rules essentially? And so what you saw earlier, that was like that front cover page, was the version that we took and developed based off of our internal lab-based protocols that we had. So we tried to make it user-friendly for all. So that was back in 2020. The sampling approach that I discussed and Monty also talked about is something that we've been implementing even back when I was still at OSU on different research projects. So I've kind of taken that experience and outcomes, and I've not only been providing technical advice to Monty, but also different ODF and WBEA leads, tribal organizations, NGOs. It's just a variety of people. So it's pretty much been like, it comes back to what are your objectives, which tends to be most people end up having the same objective when it comes to American beaver monitoring. And so it's recognizing, you know, is there a dam component? Is there a non-dam component that you're interested in? But ultimately, what's really cool, especially with the ODF and WBEAs, is that most of these areas across the state where data collection is currently happening as we speak, most people are using that randomized approach to make the data collection more robust. And they're using the 200-meter stretches as well, or 200-meter survey reaches. And they're also identifying activity using that protocol as well. So what it does is it sets us up really well, which I'm excited about, to compare and contrast across the state. So depending on where you're at, kind of getting at Jim's question and also Mark's, is you can hone in once you actually start testing hypotheses. You can look at the potential impacts from grazing in terms of beaver activity outcomes. You can look at forest management activity impacts as well, water perenniality, stuff like that. It will totally depend on where you're at in the state. But what's cool is at the high level, we've set ourselves up successfully that we can compare and contrast at a higher level, which we've never been able to do before, which is really cool.
And you just went because that was what I was curious about. So there is a group of folks around that may be doing similar research that are benefiting from the findings and lessons learned of the process that you're going through. So there is, so I imagine this is a kind of like tightly knit group of folks that are doing similar work. So you do share all this information, and so you're building upon each other's research. Is that correct?
Correct. So a lot of these folks, so we developed a statewide monitoring group years ago, and it's an ArcGIS online group. And so on that site, you can have access to the most recent survey form that you can populate through Survey 123 application. So that way everyone's using the same exact data sheet across the state. The survey form is there, the protocol is there, and then of course all of the collected data is there as well. So we have developed data sharing agreements and stuff like that. So that way people who are part of this monitoring group, which right now at this point is actually focused on government agencies only for a variety of reasons. Yes, people can see what's been collected elsewhere in the state. And so what's cool is for the NGO piece, for folks who are also collecting beaver activity data as well, using the protocol and using the survey form, they're then submitting their information to myself and ODF&W with the intent of submitting it at the end of the survey season. So that way we can further grow the larger data set.
Love that. Thank you so much for your work, Vanessa, and you too, Monty.
You're
Yeah,
welcome.
thank you. Thank you, Vanessa and Monty. And I'll just add a little bit to that with ODFW's Beaver Action Plan, there is a partnership that is meeting. I think we decided on quarterly, maybe it's just a couple times a year. So all of the players that are having these conversations and investigating beaver patterns of occupancy and practitioners who are working on beaver restoration have a venue where they're convening and comparing notes and learning from each other, and have appreciated Vanessa and Monty's involvement in that, as well as the folks from all of the other geographies as well. So that's another forum that ODFW is hosting to make sure we're all learning from each other. And OCRF has played a really important role in advancing a lot of the goals and objectives of that work. So kudos to this group for keeping an eye on this important issue. It's much appreciated. And we're nearing the end of time, so I'll give Commissioner Labhart the last word on this topic. and then we'll move to the next agenda item.
Okay, I'm sorry. And this might be a question for you, Sarah or Derek. So we've got millions of acres of private land, and Monty's intimately involved in getting the benefits of that. Is this going over onto private land? These surveys, the data, the coordination. I'm trying to figure out how much potential opportunity there is for private landowners who want to be voluntarily saying, yeah, it's part of the Beaver Action Plan, and others, they want to be involved too. Thoughts on that? Maybe Vanessa's nodding, so she might know the answer.
I can answer if you want, but I'll leave it to Sarah and Derek to take first dibs.
I'll take it. Yes, that is indeed the intent. The Beaver Action Plan is not limited to state lands, federal lands. It is coast to coast, fake line to fake line around the state. And that's what you see in our beaver emphasis areas. It's a mix of various ownership types. And so one of the other factors or the to-dos in our Beaver Action Plan is to develop habitat recommendations and guidelines such that land managers, whether private, whether public, what have you, can use some of those materials to improve habitat conditions for beaver on their properties. And especially as we identify sites where these locations are habitat limited, we want to increase the abundance and distribution of that beaver habitat. And that's where we're seeing a lot of places around the state, regardless of the land ownership type, we don't have habitat for the animal. And yet there's really no guidance documents out there to talk about how to get habitat for the animal. And so that's just another critical to-do item in our Beaver Action Plan, which I think, and when we're developing these baseline surveys, if we can get a little bit further advanced to identify what are indeed the limiting factors, if it indeed becomes habitat limitation, we can use those other materials to then be applied to that location, which although Monty apparently is a short timer and doesn't care what's going to happen soon, I would imagine that the forest is going to want to try to, as we've talked in the past, right, Monty, you want to be able to use this information to try to improve habitat conditions, try to identify what the forest has in their capacity to reach this overall goal, which is more beaver modified habitats, more beaver modified landscapes, and the long list of benefits that come from that. So this is just kind of like that first starting point, but then ideally the folks like BLM, Forest Service that are the experts in land management can then come in with their skill set to get us where we need to be.
I care, Derek. I know we're out of time. I know we're out of time.
5 years, but who's counting?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, not me. Just wanted to give Derek a shout really quick. He's been super supportive through this whole process, kind of helped us shepherd the OCRF grant along. And so thanks to you, Derek. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Monty. Great. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking the extra time to feed our curiosity, and appreciate all of your work on this project and your partnership in all of the ways in which we work together. So thank you. And for those who are kind of joining us late, we had a little bit of a agenda change in that unfortunately our other guest speaker, James Whalen, is unable to join us. He had some internet issues. So we kind of let the Beaver agenda item run long. And Mauricio, if it is okay with you, I think we will skip the break, pause just briefly for invited public comment. If any members of the public would like to make public comment, please raise your hand and we can give you the floor. And then if from there, we'll go right into our boards and commissions overview with Brandy Hemsley. So in looking at the list, Joe, you might be the only member of the public listening in here today. Did you have any comments for the committee? I'm seeing and hearing none. So Mauricio and Reba, are you ready to move on to the next?
Sounds good.
Great. Reva, I would love if you would take the opportunity to introduce Brandy. Brandy, welcome. Thanks for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandy. So we have Brandy Hemsley today. She's the Executive Appointments Advisor, I think is her title, from the governor's office. And we're lucky that she came and take the time to speak with us, to speak with the OSTRF Advisory Committee. So she's going to be providing a brief overview of the appointments process and some tips for board member success. And I'm happy she's here. So I think this is going to be some good information for all board members. And she can share some things she's working on for board member support. And especially good for our newer members, such as Jim and Liza Jade, because she might have some new information to share with you all. But yeah, helpful for the whole committee. So we're happy to have you, Brandy, and we're ready when you are.
Great. Thanks everyone for having me back. This is my second visit, maybe third, but I think second visit. And so it's nice. I see some familiar faces and some new faces. So I'm glad to be here. Yeah, so I am the Executive Appointments Advisor with the Governor's Office. I work with our director, Maya Crawford Peacock, and the rest of the team. Many of you have probably interacted with at least one of us at some point. Probably more likely Shawneen O'Brien Lee, who is our appointments manager that handles all the application stuff. So, but just in case you haven't ever interacted with any of us, hello, nice to meet you all. So I have a slideshow I will share now, if you'll just bear with me for 1 second. And I will say up front, I've been having some computer problems these last couple of days. Applications are just closing all by themselves. So I will hope that doesn't happen to me now. And if it does, I will be right back. I promise it's not on purpose. Okay, so you should be able to see a PowerPoint now. Is that right?
Yeah, looks good. We can see it.
Okay, so yeah, so wanted to start off with a huge thank you. You know, boards and commissions are a really important part of state government, and you know, your volunteer service to this board is incredibly valuable, and we are very grateful for all that you all do. You know, by serving as a board member, you're helping make things better in our state, bring new ideas to the table, and just make sure that you know, transparency is promoted, that the public is protected, and really just making sure that everyone in Oregon is represented, and that Oregonians have a voice in the decisions that are impacting their lives. Just quickly, a little bit about the executive appointments team. There are 5 of us in the executive appointments office. I mentioned my boss, Maya, earlier. She's our director. I'm the advisor. Shawneen O'Brien Lee is our executive appointments manager. Her role is really focused on, again, that appointments process, making sure that applications are handled well. She will be the one who sends out, when you get your appointment letter or your reappointment letter, she's in charge of all of that. Helen Hong is our executive appointments coordinator. She works a lot with our licensing boards, especially the health licensing boards. And then Zach Pipo is our team's executive support person. And so he's also someone that you might get emails from or hear from, especially around the time of appointments and reappointments. Oh, and I didn't say my own role. My role is really focused on supporting Maya and her work and supporting the whole team, but also really focusing in on support for boards and commissions. And so that means both the board administrators and the staff that help the boards run and support the boards, but also board members. And so I do a lot of things like training, best practices, looking for sort of efficiencies and process improvements, and doing a lot of work to bring consistent processes and practices to our boards and commissions. And just really to serve as sort of a bridge between the governor's office and all of you. So. I won't spend a ton of time on this because as current members, you all are probably at least somewhat familiar with this process. We have over 270 governor appointed boards and commissions, lots of different types of boards. Some of them are Senate confirmed and some of them are not. So there's a lot that we're juggling and keeping track of, but it's a bigger system than I think. Our board system is a bigger system than I think a lot of people realize. In terms of applicants, again, this will be familiar to most of you. I know we have a member of the public here, so I hope you make note of this in case you're ever interested in joining a board or a commission. The process is to check out the boards and commissions website, which I have a link to this in the slides, and these slides can go out to everyone after this meeting. We have a board book that lists almost all of the boards and commissions. It's in the process of being updated, but it gives you a nice picture of the universe of what's out there and the kinds of boards that you might be interested in serving on. We also have a vacancy and expiration list that is updated multiple times per year, and that can give you an idea of seats that are currently open and seats that are coming open soon. So you can keep an eye on that. And you can always reach out to the board administrator if you want more information on a specific board or commission. You can also reach out to me. That's something that I do a lot, is talk to folks about what they're interested in, where they might want to serve, and kind of help them connect with people who can give them more information about whichever opportunities they might be interested in. And then, as you all probably know, most of our applications, or all of our applications, go through Workday. We keep those in our system for 2 years, which means that if there's a board that you're interested in, maybe there's not a seat open yet, but you want to make sure to get your name in the hopper, you can do that. And then we also have some other processes that we follow once people are selected by the governor, including a background check and a Department of Revenue check. So terms and reappointments. The length of term is usually determined by law, typically runs between 1 to 4 years. According to the law, no one is allowed to serve more than 4 years in a single term. And so sometimes the number of terms is limited by law, other times it's not specified. And so in those cases, the general practice is to limit members to 2 terms. That's the governor's preference, mostly because she wants to make sure that, anyone who wants to serve has the opportunity to do so. It's really nice to kind of keep things fresh, keep people rotating through. It is also pretty common, though, for folks to maybe serve 2 terms or even 1 term on a particular board and then move to a different board. That's a pretty common thing, and always appreciated and encouraged. To be considered for reappointment, this is important for current members to know. Members are required to fill out a new application in Workday. That's a question that we do get a lot. People say, well, hey, I just did one, can't you just use the information from my first term? And no, we really like to have current information, and the governor really, as she's reviewing the appointment recommendations, likes to be able to see current information, current resume, just to make sure that, we have a good picture of sort of who you are and what you're bringing, because a lot can change in 4 years. Just a note about recruitment for new members. We believe that all of you as board members have a big role to play in recruiting new members. And so, we ask folks to think about your board, voices that could be missing, maybe areas of the state or groups or communities who aren't well represented, and to think about that and try to do some outreach and be kind of on the lookout for potential members who might bring some of those perspectives to your board. Of course, we always ask you to work in coordination with your board administrator and board staff, and think about ways that you might be reaching out, just kind of in your day-to-day life, thinking about your personal networks, people in the community, any professional networks or professional associations that you might be connected to. And then again, just in your community, those local businesses, community groups, clubs, there's all kinds of opportunities to be able to spread the word and sort of let people know about the opportunities to serve. So this next section The good news is I'm about halfway through, and then I'll be quiet and have some conversation, hopefully, with all of you. I just also wanted to share some general tips for success and some things that we like to share with board members just to help you get the most out of your service and help you be as effective and impactful as possible in your role. In terms of your role as a board member, there are lots of reasons folks choose to serve on a board or a commission. It can range from interest in learning more about state government and how it works to wanting to serve the public and give back. Sometimes people serve on a board because they want to have an impact on an issue that's really important to them personally or professionally, or maybe wanting to ensure, the quality of a particular service or product. Basically, as many reasons to serve as there are people serving in these roles. And so, again, your service is so appreciated. And, whatever your reason is, we do ask folks to remember that you're appointed to serve the people of Oregon as a whole. And so a board member's primary responsibility is the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And we do ask, sometimes folks are appointed to boards or commissions recommended to serve on a board or commission by a professional association or because of their role in a particular professional association, interest group, maybe state agency. And so we're asking people when they're bringing when they're wearing that hat, I guess, and they're serving as part of that role, that of course you're expected to bring the point of view of that role to the board, but also remember that anytime there's a conflict between your professional association or that role that you're serving in and the interests of the public, that you're always working for the public benefit first. So that can be, that's something that comes up from time to time, and that can be a tricky line to walk. And so if you ever have questions about that or would like support with something like that, just please feel free to reach out. And then of course we do ask boards, generally speaking, all boards and board members to be thinking about the people that you're serving, seek input from the public. As you all, you have a member of the public here today, offer those opportunities for the public to engage with you all, and just make sure that you have the opportunity to hear from the people who are impacted by the decisions that you're making. Some other tips for being an effective board member. I like to say, don't be shy. You were chosen to serve on this board because of your expertise, your experience, and your knowledge. And so we hope that you will feel comfortable bringing that forward and being really actively engaged in the work that your board is doing. Something that I have heard both in this role and in my previous role, where I worked with a lot of agency level advisory groups, is that sometimes public members in particular can feel that maybe they don't have the level of expertise as the other board members have, and so they may feel a little less comfortable putting their ideas forward. Sometimes newer members can get that feeling, and what I would say is that just really encourage you to step up as much as you can and get engaged, because you're here for a reason. And particularly when we have newer members, that can actually be really beneficial to have a fresh set of eyes and a fresh voice. So just really want to encourage folks to engage. Of course, things we all know, things like regular meeting attendance, being prepared for the meetings, getting an understanding of your board in terms of the role that your board plays and the roles that you have as a member. And that's an area where the board administrator and the staff who support your board can be particularly helpful. Get to know your fellow board members. And we also encourage people to try to keep in mind being the inclusive voice. So, always when decisions are being made, when you're having conversations, kind of have in your mind and be able to say, hey, whose perspective isn't being represented here? Who's missing from this conversation? What are some things we might not be thinking about right now? We also encourage you all to learn about the issues impacting your board and the people that you're serving and the communities that you're serving. And I think the presentation just before this is a great example of that. You're learning about kind of the work that's being done, and that can help inform the decisions that you're making. Think about supports that you might need as a board member, and that can be anything from flexibility because you have a particularly difficult schedule. That could be something like a disability accommodation. That could be maybe for a new member, some extra support going through meeting materials or kind of learning the procedures of your particular board. Whatever that looks like for you, please reach out for the support that you need. And your board administrator and board staff are a great first place to start with that. And I would say that, my role is also really focused on board member support. So I'm also someone who's available for different kinds of support if you need it. I never mind being contacted. And if it's not something that I'm able to help with, I can connect you with someone who can. And then it's also important to remember, as a board member, you should only speak on behalf of the board or take actions on behalf of the board when you've been explicitly authorized by the board to do so. That's a thing that will come up from time to time as folks maybe forget to get that okay before they kind of go out and share the information or take an action. So just being sure that you're mindful of that. And of course, protecting confidential information is something that's very important for lots of different situations with boards. Just quickly wanted to say a little bit about ethics and ethical considerations. And of course, I've said this before because it's really important, keeping in mind that your primary mission is service to the public. And be sure that, we ask folks to avoid using board memberships as a personal platform. And that can be another tricky line to walk. I know that a lot of people join boards and commissions and want to serve because it's an issue that they really care about and they're passionate about. And that's fantastic and important. And just remember to be sure that it's not your personal platform. State law forbids board members from using their role or their office for professional gain. And there are trainings and information available from the Oregon Government Ethics Commission that really go over all of that. There is some required training that you all will have taken when you were first appointed, and there are additional things available through the OGEC that go into more detail about that. Again, this is a link that will be shared in this slideshow that you all can feel free to take a look at later. They have a lot of great information and support available. They also have a phone number that you just call and someone answers and they'll just talk through a situation with you. So please, they're a fantastic resource. And if you ever have a question related to ethical issues, please feel free and don't hesitate to reach out to them. They're wonderful. The last piece I wanted to share with you all are some opportunities for learning and support. As I mentioned, my role is really focused on this. My position was a new one that was created by this governor because in the past, we would get folks appointed and they would go out to serve and there wasn't really a lot of ongoing support and education available. And so that's my whole thing, is to make that available. So some of the work that I've been doing and our team has been doing, just broadly speaking, we're really focused on equity-centered recruitment and retention of board members. Part of that is I have, in partnership with the Oregon Advocacy Commissions and some other folks from state agencies and some folks from community-based organizations, have established, we're calling ourselves the Equity Collaborative, and we're doing a lot of work digging into how we can better conduct that equity-centered recruitment and retention. And we're still working on a lot of these things, but we're thinking about recruitment events, training for boards who want to learn more about how to do really impactful outreach in the community, things like that. I do offer support with community outreach and engagement. That can look like a lot of different things. Sometimes it's going out and speaking to community groups. going maybe if you all have an opening coming up, particularly if you're maybe struggling to recruit, I can help get the word out, things like that. I'm working with a couple of community-based organizations currently to develop some information and education programs for potential members. And so it would be something that we can use to help people learn about boards and commissions, what they do, what service looks like, and kind of help spread the word and get people excited about the potential of serving on a board or commission. And then we have some ongoing learning opportunities specifically for current board members. And there are 2 coming up. One in November, we're just calling it Meet the Executive Appointments Team. I will say that if you do attend that meeting, some of what you heard in the beginning of my presentation, you'll hear again. But that's just an opportunity to meet the team. The whole team will be there, hear more about our rules, our office, the kind of supports that we might offer you all. And then we're also in partnership with the Ethics Commission, are hosting a public meetings law training specifically for board members. That is on December 12th. These meetings are both held by teams, so you don't have to show up anywhere for those. And I will be sending out information about those 2 trainings after this meeting as well. So you'll have all of that. And then just a few more resources for all of you. The Boards and Commissions website that I mentioned earlier, that's where you can find information about board service. You can find the board book that lists the universe of boards and commissions. You can find our board member handbook, which I've also linked here. There is a listserv that I've created. I just launched that a couple of weeks ago, so you probably got an email saying you'd been signed up for that. That's what that's all about. If you have questions about that, or if you didn't get that email and you want to be on the list, please let me know. Again, I mentioned earlier the Ethics Commission. Their website is wonderful. It has resources for all of you. It has a training calendar. And again, information about how to contact them if you have questions. And I have 2 other links here just for general information. One is information about Oregon State Government, and the other is specific information about the Americans with Disabilities Act, because that's one of the things I mentioned earlier in terms of supports that folks might need. Just really wanting to make sure that you have information about that and are able to seek support that might be needed for any disability-related issue. Okay, that's my thank you slide with my contact information. And then I will take the slides down. Would love to hear from you all. Obviously, any questions you have about anything, and particularly interested in feedback on some of the information I shared with you today, because this is something that I want to share with other boards and commissions, and you all are the first ones that I've talked to. So love to hear what you think. And if you have particular ideas or suggestions or support needs that you want to make sure that myself and my team know about, that would also be really helpful. So I'm going to stop these slides and we can chat.
Thank you, Brandy. Really appreciate that. Any questions or feedback for Brandy?
Brandy, I thought it was well presented. You went through it and you talk at a good pace. So you did a nice job of moving us through that process and sharing the information. So thank you for that.
Thanks very much.
Brandy, this is Liza Jane. I would just add I agree with Mark, and overall, I feel like you made yourself very available. So if there's questions, we have lots of support and resources, so that well done.
Thanks very much. And I saw in the chat, Jenna said 270 is a lot. That's a lot of boards and commissions. You were right. But I will say it's a lot of fun. I think this is the most interesting job I've ever had, because I just never know. Like, I show up today and I get to learn about beaver habitats, and I never know what I'm gonna want to learn on any given day. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, thank you, Brandy. This committee is a very active committee, very passionate, really takes its community engagement and inclusivity very seriously, and it shows in the work that they produce and in the programs and projects that they fund. So, if you're ever looking for a good example of a committee that is really demonstrating inclusivity and a genuine attempt to try to engage diverse and underserved groups, this is a good one to highlight.
Yes, I appreciate you saying that. And, I mentioned earlier that I had come and been part of one of the meetings of this committee before. And I remember that is one of the things that I took away. And I am looking for examples, and I am looking for, so stay tuned for that, I would say.
Happy to engage with you.
Yeah.
On that. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And like I said, I will send this information over so you all can have the slides. My contact information will be in there, and I would just encourage you to reach out anytime about anything. And thank you all.
Thank you. With that, I'm looking at Reba and I'm looking at Mauricio because I believe we're rounding the end of the meeting here. Any follow-ups or next steps, Reba, that we need to talk about before we wrap up?
No, just that next meeting is scheduled for December 3rd. So we'll see you all in a month.
And thank you, Sarah, for leading this extremely smooth meeting today and just being such an amazing maestro of all things that went through today. I feel so relieved with half a brain in the middle of the night. I am so grateful for you. So, and thank you
what
to
is
all
it?
of you, of course, for being
Yeah,
here.
I mean, is it midnight?
It's got to
Just
be
about,
close.
yes.
It's midnight
Yeah.
where
Just
Mauricio is.
about.
So I was very happy to pinch hit for you today so you could listen but not have to be on. So
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
know
much.
I'm no Carl, but I'm happy to help out whenever I can. So thanks everybody, and go for a walk and enjoy some peaceful time on this very momentous election day. So
And
we'll see you all later.
Mauricio, you're in our thoughts. The people of Spain are in our thoughts. Hopefully come out of this. It's a terrible situation, but love.
It is.
Yeah, you're in our thoughts, buddy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Labhart. I was sharing with someone that it is unfortunate, but these tragedies also tend to bring the best in humanity. And what I've seen here just once again restores my faith in all of us and how we can come together, especially when we need it most. So
yeah, well said.
Thank you all.
Yeah, well said. Good way to end the meeting. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.